The laughter started before I even sat down. I felt it before I heard it. A ripple through the amphitheater. 40 species turning their heads. Some kind of translation delay making the sound arrive in waves instead of all at once. I kept my eyes on my chair. 1 step, 2 steps, sit. A Kaltari delegate near the front was doing something with his hands, mimicking a handshake, badly, his 4 fingers flopping like he was trying to catch a fish. Someone behind him made a sound that my earpiece translated as laughter, though the actual noise was closer to a kettle boiling. I did not look up. My name is Dara Whitfield. I had been Earth's junior attaché to the Interstellar Council for 14 months. And in 14 months I had learned exactly one survival skill. Count something. Anything. Let your eyes find a detail small enough to hold on to, while the room does whatever it wants to do around you. Today it was the translation stutter. Every few seconds, the Council's language array hiccuped on an unfamiliar word, and a small red light blinked above the podium. I counted the blinks. 4, 5, 6. The petition of the soul species, said the presiding officer, a Vantic elder whose skin shifted color with what I assumed was boredom, for full voting membership, is denied. Again. More laughter. Not cruel exactly. Worse than cruel. Fond. The kind of laughter you give a child who is asked to drive the car. Earth has held provisional status for 11 of your years, the elder continued, not unkindly, which is, I am told, nearly a quarter of your species' entire recorded spacefaring history. We admire the ambition. We question the timeline. 7 blinks. 8. Ambassador Okafor sat beside me, spine straight, hands folded, face doing absolutely nothing. I had learned to read the nothing. It meant something. A Dren representative, tall and reed-thin, leaned toward his neighbor and said something in his own tongue that the translator rendered, unhelpfully, as approximately 50 years old and already building warships. How precious. The neighbor's laugh crackled through my earpiece like static. I kept counting blinks. 9. The vote closed. Denied, 41-2. Our 2 allies, small mining consortium worlds who owed us favors, voted yes, out of loyalty rather than conviction. Everyone knew it. Nobody cared. Ambassador Okafor stood, thanked the council for their time in a voice with no temperature in it at all, and walked out. I followed 2 steps behind, the way protocol required, counting my own footsteps now, because the blinking light was gone, and I needed something. We did not speak in the corridor. We did not speak in the elevator. It was only once we reached the embassy shuttle, doors sealed, engine humming that low hum that meant privacy, that Okafor finally spoke. How many blinks? I blinked myself, caught off guard. What, sir? You count things. I've watched you do it for a year. How many blinks today? 9, sir. He nodded slowly, like the number confirmed something he already suspected. Last month it was 6. The month before, 4. I did not understand what he meant by that. Not then. I only knew that his jaw had a tightness to it I had never seen. Not once. Not during the worst sessions. Not during the tariff disputes, or the border disputes, or the time a Vantic senator had called our entire species charming livestock to his face. My earpiece buzzed. Not the council channel. Home. Emergency recall. All Earth personnel. Priority 1. I stared at the words hovering in my vision. Emergency recalls happened perhaps twice a year, always for equipment failures, always resolved within hours. Sir, I'm getting a priority 1. Okafor was already looking at his own display, and for the first time in 14 months, I watched something move behind his eyes that I could only call relief. So am I, he said. Get us back to the embassy ship. Now. Is something wrong? He didn't answer right away. The shuttle banked hard, throwing me sideways, and through the window I watched the council spire fall away beneath us, that great glittering monument to every species that had ever been allowed to matter. Ambassador, is something wrong? No, he said, and there was something in his voice I had never heard from him before. Not fear, not anger, something quieter and older than both. For the first time since I took this posting, Terra, I think something might finally be right. I did not sleep that night, though I did not know yet that I would not sleep for several more. The embassy ship was called the Meridian, a modest vessel by council standards, small enough that other delegations sometimes joked we had brought a shuttle and called it a flagship. I had always hated that joke. I hated it a little less now, walking its corridors. because for the first time those corridors felt like they belonged to someone who did not need to apologize for their size. Every screen I passed was dark, not broken, dark on purpose, the particular dark of a system that has been shut down deliberately, rather than one that has failed. I stopped at the first one, a public terminal near the officers' mess that normally displayed trade manifests and diplomatic schedules, and found only a single line of text. System suspended per Directive 001. Clearance required. I did not have clearance. I had 14 months of provisional standing and a talent for counting blinking lights. Attaché Whitfield. I turned. Commander Priya Anand stood in the corridor behind me, uniform crisp, face unreadable in the particular way that all my superiors seemed to have mastered and I never would. She was the Meridian's ranking military liaison, a woman I had spoken to perhaps a dozen times in 14 months, always briefly, always about logistics. Commander, what's happening? The screens. Come with me. I came. She led me not to the diplomatic wing but downward, through corridors I had never walked, past checkpoints that scanned my retina without asking permission, until we reached a briefing room I did not know existed. Ambassador Okafor was already there, along with perhaps a dozen others I recognized only vaguely, faces from budget meetings and security briefings, names I had never bothered to learn because I had never imagined I would need them. A woman at the head of the table looked up as I entered. Older than Okafor, silver threading through dark hair pulled back tight, a face built for giving orders rather than receiving apologies. Sit, she said. You're the last one. I sat. Nobody offered an introduction. I am going to tell you something, the woman said, and I am going to tell it to you exactly once, because we do not have time for it twice. My name is Director Isabel Marchetti. I do not work for the Diplomatic Corps. I have not worked for the Diplomatic Corps in 11 years, though very few people outside this room know that, including most of the Diplomatic Corps. I glanced at Okafor. He was watching Marchetti with the stillness of a man who already knew every word she was about to say. 11 years ago, Marchetti continued, Earth signed the Sol Compact. Every person in this room has read it. Most of the Council believes it to be a trade and non-aggression framework, a set of concessions we made in exchange for provisional status, market access, and protection under Council law. She paused. That is what it says. It is not what it does. Someone at the far end of the table shifted in their seat. Marchetti did not look at them. The Sol Compact was written by people in this government who understood something the Council never bothered to ask about us. We do not develop technology the way they do. We do not build militaries the way they do. We had exactly one advantage when we walked into that negotiating room 11 years ago, and it was this. Nobody in the galaxy had the faintest idea what humans were actually capable of, because we had barely left our own solar system. So we told them, she said. We showed them exactly enough to be taken seriously, and not one particle more. We signed away rights to expand our fleet numbers beyond a fixed ratio. We signed away rights to develop certain weapons classifications. We signed away claims to 3 border systems nobody in this room has ever heard mentioned since, because we let the Council believe those systems were worthless. I felt something cold settle into my stomach. They weren't worthless. Marchetti looked at me for the first time, and there was the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth, gone before I could be sure I had seen it. No, Attaché Whitfield, they were not worthless. The room was silent, except for the hum of the ship's systems, a sound I had never noticed before, and now could not stop hearing. For 11 years, Marchetti said, every restriction in that compact has done exactly what it was designed to do. It made us look smaller than we are. It made every ambassador in this room walk into that chamber and be laughed at, mocked, dismissed, treated as a curiosity rather than a threat. Ambassador Okafor has sat through more insults than any diplomat in Council history. He has done so on my direct order, every single time, because every insult confirmed to the Council that the compact was working. Okafor's jaw was tight again, that same tightness from the shuttle. Today, Marchetti said, the vote failed. Again. 11 years, and they still will not grant us full status. 11 years of concessions, restraint, and patience. And this morning, a room full of people, who have never once visited our solar system, decided we had not yet earned the right to be taken seriously. She reached forward and touched a control on the table. The dark screen behind her flickered to life, and I watched a single word appear across it in letters large enough to fill the wall. Terminated. At 0600 this morning, Marchetti said, on my authorization and with the consent of every governing body on Earth, the Sol Compact was terminated, along with every subsidiary treaty, trade agreement, and non-aggression pact attached to it. Every restriction we accepted 11 years ago in exchange for a seat at a table that was never going to give us one is void. Nobody spoke. I realized I had stopped breathing and made myself start again. What happens now? I finally managed. To the fleet ratios? The weapons restrictions? They were restrictions on paper, Marchetti said. Attaché Whitfield, do you understand what our shipyards have been doing for 11 years, while the Council believed we were building at a fraction of our capacity? I did not answer. I did not need to. I could see the answer in the room around me, in the careful stillness of every face, in Okafor's tightened jaw finally beginning, very slightly, to loosen. We have not been hiding a fleet, Marchetti said. We have been hiding a decade. My earpiece buzzed again. A new alert. This one without the red urgency of the recall, something quieter, almost gentle by comparison. Fleet repositioning. Sector 7. Authorized. I looked at Okafor. Sir, what is Sector 7? For the first time since I had known him, Ambassador Okafor smiled. It was not a large smile. It barely moved his face at all, but it reached his eyes in a way I had never once seen in 14 months of watching him absorb insult after insult without a flicker. Sector 7, he said quietly, is the resource border we ceded to the Vantic in the second year of the Compact. Generously, they called it at the time, a gesture of goodwill from a species that did not yet understand what it was giving away. He stood, buttoning his jacket, the motion unhurried, almost ceremonial. I believe, Attaché Whitfield, we are about to take it back. I did not know then how much would change before the sun rose again over the Meridian's home port, or how many friendships I had built across 14 months of quiet diplomacy were about to be tested by a decade of secrets finally coming due. I only knew that the room around me had changed shape, the way a held breath changes shape the instant before release, and that whatever Earth had been for the last 11 years, it was not going to be that anymore. Marchetti was still speaking, laying out timelines, listing systems, but I found myself only half listening, my mind circling back instead to the shuttle window, to the council spire falling away beneath us, to Okafor's voice saying something might finally be right. I understood now what he had meant. And somewhere out past the ship's hull, in the dark between stars, I understood that a decade of patience was about to become very loud indeed. The first ship I saw with my own eyes was the Halberd, and I saw it the way you see something you were never supposed to see. Through a viewport I had no clearance to be standing at. On a deck I had wandered onto because Commander Anand had forgotten to tell me where I was and was not allowed to go. It filled the window, not filled the way a large object fills a frame, but filled the way weather fills a sky, edges running past the edges of the glass in every direction, a shape my brain kept trying to reduce to something familiar, and failing every time. You're not supposed to be here. I did not turn around right away. My hand had found the viewport frame, and was gripping it, knuckles pale, and I let myself have one more second of simply looking, before I answered. Commander, what is that? Anand came to stand beside me, arms folded, and for a moment, she did not answer either. When she did, her voice had a strange note in it, something between pride and exhaustion. That is the Halberd, third of its class. There are 11 more like it currently active, and 40 in various stages of construction that the Council has never once detected, because every shipyard producing them sits inside asteroid fields we listed on 11 years of trade manifests as commercially unviable. Unviable. Empty rock, Anand said. That's what the Council believes. That's what every single survey request from every single species for 11 years has been told, and every single time, they believed it. Because why would anyone lie about rocks? I thought about the phrase blood money, though nobody in the room had used it, and understood suddenly that some phrases do not need to be said aloud, for their shape to sit in your chest anyway. How long have you known? I asked. 4 years. I was briefed the day I made commander. She did not look away from the ship. You get used to carrying it. You have to. There were nights I sat in briefings with Vantic officers, drinking their tea, listening to them explain very patiently why humanity would never be ready for real membership, and I smiled, and I nodded, and I thought about the Halberd sitting 40 light-years away, in a rock field labeled unviable. That's a strange way to live. Most extraordinary things are. She finally turned to look at me. You should go. Marchetti wants the diplomatic staff assembled in an hour. Full briefing before the council reconvenes. They're calling an emergency session already? They didn't call it, Anand said, and there was something almost like amusement in her voice now. We did. I did not understand what that meant until I was standing back in the briefing room an hour later, surrounded now by faces that had multiplied since the morning. Diplomatic staff pulled from every corner of the meridian, all of them wearing the same expression I imagined was on my own face, confusion trying very hard to look like composure. Marchetti stood at the head of the table again, and this time a live feed hovered behind her, showing what I recognized after a moment as the council's own communications array, a channel none of us should have had access to. 40 minutes ago, she said, Earth's delegation submitted a formal notice to the council secretariat. Not a petition, not a request, a notice, advising all member species that as of this morning, the Sol Compact and all its subsidiary agreements are terminated, and that any species wishing to maintain relations with Earth going forward will need to negotiate new terms individually. A murmur ran through the room. I said nothing, because I had already heard this, in fragments, in the hours since the shuttle. But hearing it stated plainly, in a room full of people whose careers had been built inside the walls of that compact, made it land differently. The Council, Marchetti continued, has requested an emergency session in 6 hours. They believe this is a negotiating tactic, a pressure move to force reconsideration of the membership vote. Isn't it? Someone asked from the back of the room, a voice I didn't recognize, young, uncertain. Marchetti's eyes found the speaker and held there a moment longer than was comfortable. No, she said, it is not. She let that sit. For 11 years, she said, we accepted every insult, every dismissal, every joke made at Earth's expense in that chamber, because the alternative was to reveal our hand before we were ready. That calculation has changed, not because of pride, because the numbers finally support it. She gestured, and the feed behind her shifted, replaced by a star field I recognized after a moment as Sector 7, the resource border Okafor had mentioned on the shuttle. Small icons moved across it in slow, deliberate lines. Reclamation of ceded territory began at 0600, and will complete within the next 18 hours, Marchetti said. The Vantic Mining Consortium currently operating in Sector 7 has been given formal notice to vacate. Peacefully, if they comply. Regardless, if they do not. They're not going to just leave, Ambassador Okafor said quietly from his seat near the front. It was the first time he had spoken since the meeting began. The Vantic have 3 fleets in that quadrant. They have 3 fleets, Marchetti agreed. We have the Halberds battle group, and 11 more like it, positioned within response range of every border system we seeded across the life of the compact. This was not a decision made overnight, Ambassador. It was made 11 years ago and executed this morning. I raised my hand, before I had fully decided to, and Marchetti's gaze landed on me with an attention I was not prepared for. Attaché Whitfield. What happens to us? I said. The diplomatic staff. If the Vantic don't comply, if this becomes... I did not finish the sentence, because I did not have a word for what I was afraid it would become. It will not become a war, Marchetti said, and for the first time her voice softened slightly, though her posture did not. The Vantic are not fools, whatever else they are. They understand math. Once they see the fleet numbers, once they understand what has been sitting in those asteroid fields for a decade, they will vacate, and they will vacate quickly, because the alternative is a fight they cannot win, and know they cannot win. And if they don't understand that fast enough? Marchetti held my gaze for a long moment. Then we will make sure they understand it, she said, before anyone gets hurt. That is the entire purpose of moving now rather than waiting for them to test us. Fear that arrives early prevents violence. Fear that arrives late causes it. I did not have an answer to that. I do not think anyone in the room did. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of preparation I only half understood. I was assigned to a secondary briefing team, tasked with compiling a summary of every treaty now void, every trade concession now reversed, every border now technically Earth's again after a decade of quiet session. It was work meant, I think, to keep junior staff occupied rather than genuinely useful, but I threw myself into it anyway, because it gave my hands something to do while my mind kept circling back to the Halberd's impossible silhouette against the dark. Somewhere in the 3rd hour, my personal terminal chimed with an incoming message, routed through a private channel, rather than the embassy system. I did not recognize the origin code at first. When I did, my stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with fleets or treaties. Kestaris. I had not spoken to him in 8 months. Not since the last time I had seen him at a council reception, both of us pretending the conversation was diplomatic small talk, while it was actually something else entirely, something we had never quite found the words for in either of our languages. The message was short. Dara, tell me this is not what it looks like from here. I stared at it for a long moment before I typed back, my fingers slower than I wanted them to be. I don't know what it looks like from there. The reply came almost immediately. It looks like your people just declared they never needed us in the first place. It looks like 11 years of my government treating your ambassador like an amusing pet was apparently exactly what you wanted us to believe. It looks like I don't know what I'm looking at anymore, Dara, and I don't know what that makes the last 2 years. I read it 3 times. I did not have an answer for that either. Not one I could put into a message. Not with the clock counting down toward an emergency session I now had to help prepare for. Not with a decade of careful, patient deception sitting between us, like a wall neither of us had known was there. I typed and deleted 4 different responses before I finally sent the only honest thing I had. I didn't know either, not until this morning. There was a long silence after that, long enough that I set the terminal down and returned to my summary work, though I found myself unable to hold a single sentence of it in my head, my eyes sliding across treaty numbers without absorbing them. The reply, when it finally came, was shorter than I expected. I have to go. There's a session in 6 hours, and I don't know which side of this I'm supposed to be standing on anymore. I did not respond. I did not know what to say that would not make it worse, and some part of me, the part that had spent 14 months learning to count blinking lights instead of feeling things, understood that this particular silence was not mine to fill. By the 5th hour, the Meridian's corridors had taken on a strange electric quality, staff moving faster than usual, voices lower, the particular hum of a ship preparing for something its crew did not yet have a name for. I found Okafor in the officer's mess, alone, a cup of untouched tea cooling in front of him, and I sat across from him without asking permission, which I would never have done that morning. You look tired, sir. I am tired, he said. 11 years of tired, though I only found out this morning that was allowed. Can I ask you something? He gestured for me to continue. Did you know? This whole time, every session, every joke, every vote against us. Did you know what was waiting behind it? Okafor was quiet for a long moment, turning the cup slowly in his hands without drinking from it. I knew there was a plan, he said finally. I did not know the shape of it. Marchetti believed, and I think she was right, that the deception worked better if the people delivering it did not have to fake anything. I was not performing humility in that chamber, Dara. For 11 years, I genuinely believed we were as small as they said we were. That must have been... I stopped, unsure of the word. Lonely, he said, supplying it for me. Yes, it was lonely. I want you to understand something, because I think you are about to learn it the hard way, the way I did this morning. Anger is easier to carry than grief. When I found out the truth, in that basement room, my first feeling was not triumph. It was fury. At every laugh I had swallowed. At every year I had smiled through insults I now understood had never needed to land at all. He finally looked up at me, and his eyes had that same steadiness from the shuttle, but sharper now, worn into something more permanent. The anger helped, he said. It gave me somewhere to put the rest of it. I would not recommend it as a strategy, Atash Whitfield, but I will not pretend it did not work. I thought of Kestaris's message, sitting unanswered on my terminal, and said nothing. Someone reached out to you, Okafor said. It was not a question. I looked up, startled. How did you... You have the same look I had 8 hours ago, like the floor moved and you are still deciding whether to trust your feet. He set the cup down. It does not get simpler, Dara. I will not lie to you and tell you it does. But it gets clearer. And clarity, in this line of work, is worth more than comfort most days. My earpiece buzzed. The session alert tone I had learned to recognize over 14 months of council appointments. Except this time, it carried none of the dread it usually did. Only a kind of taut, waiting stillness, like the moment before a held door finally swings open. Session in 20 minutes, I said. Okafor stood, straightening his jacket with the same unhurried ceremony I had watched that morning, and for a moment, I saw not a diplomat, but something closer to a soldier, settling armor into place. Then let us go find out, he said, What a room full of people who have spent 11 years laughing at us sounds like, when they finally understand the joke was never on Earth at all. I followed him out of the mess hall, past crew moving with quiet urgency towards stations I did not have names for, past viewports that no longer showed a modest embassy ship reflected in the glass but something else entirely, something that had been there the whole time, waiting patiently under a decade of careful, deliberate disguise. Somewhere behind us, Sector 7's reclamation continued in silence, ships moving into position light years away, with a certainty that needed no announcement, no vote, no permission from anyone who had once believed those systems worthless. I did not know yet how the session would go. I did not know what I would say if Kestaris looked at me across that chamber, whether the 2 years between us could survive what today had revealed, or whether some things, once uncovered, simply could not be put back the way they were. I only knew that the ship beneath my feet had stopped pretending to be small, and that somewhere in that change, I had stopped pretending too. The council chamber looked different when nobody in it was laughing. I noticed it the moment we walked in, Okafor first, myself 2 steps behind out of habit rather than instruction now. The seats were fuller than usual. Delegations that normally sent junior staff to routine sessions had sent their principals instead, and the air itself seemed to carry a weight it had not carried that morning. The Vantic elder who had presided over the vote sat in his usual place, but his skin, which shifted color with mood the way I had learned to half-read over 14 months, had settled into a shade I had never seen on him before. Not the bored gray-green of routine business, something closer to ash. We took our seats. I counted nothing. For the first time in 14 months, I found I did not need to. The delegation of Sol, the elder began, and there was a stiffness in his voice that had not been there hours earlier, has requested this emergency session be recognized as a formal address, rather than a response to inquiry. The chair grants this request. Okafor rose. He did not carry notes. He never had. Not in 14 months. But today the absence of them felt different, less like confidence, and more like a man who had finally stopped needing to perform, being unbothered. "Members of the council," he said, and his voice filled the chamber without needing to be raised, "I want to begin by thanking you for your patience over the last 11 years. A ripple went through the room, uncertain, waiting for the joke that usually followed a line like that. It did not come. Earth signed the Sol Compact 11 years ago, Okafor continued, under terms that restricted our fleet development, limited our weapons research, and ceded strategic border systems to neighboring species, in exchange for provisional standing and protection under council law. We have honored every term of that agreement without exception for over a decade." He paused, letting the silence stretch exactly as long as it needed to. "As of 0600 this morning, that agreement no longer exists." Nobody laughed this time. I watched the Dren representative, the one who had made the joke about precious 50-year-old shipbuilders, sit very still in his seat, hands folded in a way that looked deliberately calm, and was not. "I want to be precise about what this means," Okafor said, "because I do not wish for any species in this chamber to act on a misunderstanding. Earth has not declared war. Earth has not issued threats. Earth has terminated a set of restrictions we voluntarily accepted, and we have done so because this council has made clear, repeatedly, across 11 years and this morning's vote, that no amount of restraint on our part would ever be rewarded with the standing we were promised." A voice called out from somewhere in the upper tier, sharp, unamused. "This is theater, Ambassador. A tantrum dressed up as policy." Okafor turned toward the voice without hurrying. "I understand why it might look that way," he said. "I would ask the chamber to consider, instead, a simple question. If this were theater, why would Sector 7 currently be undergoing peaceful reclamation by 11 Earth vessels, none of which this council has ever recorded in any registry, survey, or intelligence estimate over the last decade?" The silence that followed was total. I watched the Vantic elder's skin shift again, ash deepening toward something with a bluish undertone I had no reference for, and understood, watching it, that I was witnessing fear translated into biology in real time. "That is not possible," the elder said, and for the first time in 14 months, his voice had lost the measured calm I had always associated with his office. "Our surveys of that region are current. Sector 7 contains no armed presence beyond the mining consortium's standard security escort. Your surveys," Okafor said, "were conducted using data we provided. I would encourage the council to commission an independent survey at its earliest convenience. I suspect the results will prove instructive." A Kaltari delegate, Not the one who had mimicked the handshake, but another, older, spoke next, his voice carrying none of the mockery from that morning. Ambassador, if what you say is true, why? Why hide this? Why allow 11 years of insult when you held such capability? Okafor was quiet for a moment, and when he answered, something in his tone had shifted, become less official and more personal, though it lost none of its weight for it. Because we understood something this council never bothered to ask us, he said. We understood that a species revealed too early is a species that gets crushed before it has the chance to grow. We let you believe we were small, because the alternative, 11 years ago, was extinction dressed up as diplomacy. You would have seen a species capable of what we are actually capable of, and you would have moved against us before we had a single ally, a single treaty, a single foothold in this galaxy worth defending. He let that settle. So we let you laugh, he said. We let you mock our ships, our timeline, our 50 years of spacefaring history, as though it were a child's drawing pinned to a refrigerator door. Every insult confirmed to you that the deception was working. I want the council to understand, clearly, that this was not born of anger. It was born of necessity. What you are seeing today, the anger, the finality of it, that is new. That is what happens when necessity finally runs its course. I glanced toward the Kaltari section of the chamber without meaning to, searching before I could stop myself, and found Castaris's eyes already on me from across the room. He did not look away, neither did I. Something passed between us that I could not name, not gratitude, not forgiveness, something more complicated and unresolved than either, and then the moment broke, as another voice rose from the chamber floor. And what? The Dren representative said, standing now, his earlier composure cracking. Do you intend to do with this capability, Ambassador, now that the mask is off? Should this council be preparing for a human empire? No, Okafor said simply. The word landed harder for its plainness than any threat could have. Earth does not want an empire, he said. We want what we asked for 11 years ago, and have been denied every year since. Recognition, standing, the right to negotiate as equals rather than supplicants. What changes today is not our ambition. It is our patience for being told that ambition is unwelcome. The elder's ash-colored skin had not settled. If anything, it had deepened further, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a formality that sounded, to my ear, like a man reaching for procedure, because he no longer trusted himself to speak plainly. The chair will require time, he said, to consult with member delegations before any formal council response can be issued. This session is recessed, Okafor said, before the elder could finish, and it was not a request. Understood. Earth will await the council's response through appropriate channels. I would only add one further point before we adjourn. He turned slowly, taking in the full chamber, every species, every delegation that had spent 11 years treating Earth's presence as a curiosity to be humored, rather than a voice to be heard. Sector 7's reclamation will conclude within the next 12 hours, he said. It is not a demonstration. It is not a warning shot. It is simply Earth exercising a right we always possessed and chose, out of caution, not to exercise until now. I would ask every delegation in this chamber to consider carefully what other rights we have chosen not to exercise, and what continued disrespect might cost in terms of our continued restraint. He sat down. The chamber did not erupt into the murmuring chaos I might have expected. Instead, it fell into something heavier, a silence made of 40 species, simultaneously recalculating a decade of assumptions, and I found myself sitting very still beside Okafor, aware of my own heartbeat in a way I rarely was, aware too of Castaris's gaze still, occasionally, finding mine across the distance of the chamber floor. We left before the recess officially closed, Okafor moving with the same unhurried certainty he had carried since the shuttle that morning, and I followed him out through corridors that had, only hours earlier, echoed with laughter at Earth's expense, and now echoed with something closer to a held breath. It was in the transit corridor outside the chamber, waiting for our shuttle, that Castaris found me. He moved quickly, breaking away from his own delegation with an urgency that drew a few glances, and stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak without being overheard, far enough that neither of us reached for the other. Terra, Castaris. For a moment, neither of us said anything else. I noticed, with the same object fixation that had carried me through 14 months of difficult moments, that his hands were shaking very slightly, a tremor I had never seen in him before. Not once. Not even during his own government's tensest negotiations. "I don't know what to say to you," he finally admitted. "Everything I might say feels wrong. Congratulations feels wrong. I'm sorry feels wrong. I don't even know which one of those I mean." "You don't have to say anything," I said. "I don't think I have the right words either." 2 years, he said, quietly, almost to himself. 2 years of this, of us, and I never once suspected. Was that the point? Was I supposed to not suspect? The question landed somewhere I was not prepared for, and I felt something old and familiar rise up in my chest. Not sadness exactly, something sharper, more useful. "I didn't know either," I said, and heard my own voice come out steadier than I expected, steadier than I felt. "I want you to understand that. I was not lying to you, Kesteris. I was as much in the dark as you were, sitting in that chamber this morning, being laughed at same as always. Whatever this is, whatever it costs us, it was never something I chose to keep from you, because I never had it to keep." He studied my face for a long moment, and something in his shoulders eased slightly, though not entirely. "I believe you," he said. "I want you to know that too. I just don't know what happens now. My government is terrified, Dara. I sat in that chamber and watched officials I have known my whole career lose every certainty they walked in with. I don't know what that does to us, to what we've built. I don't know either," I admitted. "I think, for now, that has to be enough. Not knowing. Together, if you're willing." He did not answer right away, and the silence between us was not the comfortable kind we had built over 2 years, but something rawer, still finding its shape. "I have to get back to my delegation," he finally said. "There will be calls, consultations. My government will want answers I don't have. I understand." He hesitated, then reached out, briefly, and touched my hand, the gesture small and uncertain in a way that told me more than any words could have. "I don't want this to be the end of it," he said. "Whatever it is now, I don't want that." "Neither do I." He left first, moving back toward his delegation, with the same urgency he had arrived with, and I stood alone in the transit corridor for a long moment, watching him go, feeling the shape of something that was not quite grief, and not quite hope, sitting uneasily in my chest. Okafor found me there a few minutes later, waiting by the shuttle with the patience of a man who had learned, over one very long day, exactly how much space to give another person's unresolved feelings. "You should know," he said as I finally joined him, "that whatever happened just now does not need to be reported. Personal matters remain personal matters, even today." "Thank you, sir." "For what it's worth," he added, as the shuttle doors sealed behind us, "I think the ones who are frightened rather than furious are the ones worth keeping as allies going forward. Fear that leads to reflection is different from fear that leads to aggression. Your friend struck me, from what little I observed, as the former." I did not answer, but I held on to that observation the way I might once have held on to a blinking light, something small and steady to fix my attention on, while the larger world outside the shuttle window continued reorganizing itself around a species that had finally stopped pretending to be smaller than it was. Behind us, through the rear viewport, the council spire shrank into the dark, and somewhere far beyond it, in a sector once ceded and now reclaimed, 12 hours of quiet, deliberate certainty continued counting down toward a completion that would change, permanently, what every species in that chamber understood about the meaning of Earth's patience. The call came at 2 in the morning, ship time, and I was awake for it because I had not managed to sleep at all. I answered before the second chime finished, Commander Anand's face filling my small terminal screen, and I knew from the set of her jaw that whatever she was about to tell me was not going to be simple. "Get to the command deck," she said. "Now, Marchetti wants the diplomatic staff present for this." "For what?" "The Vantic aren't vacating Sector 7. I was already moving before she finished the sentence, pulling on my jacket with hands that were not quite steady, my mind racing ahead of my feet toward every version of what those words might mean. The command deck was a different kind of chaos than the briefing room had been. Denser, faster, officers moving between stations, with the clipped efficiency of people who had trained for this exact moment for years, without ever expecting to need it. Marchetti stood at the center of it, watching a tactical display that filled the far wall, 3 distinct clusters of ships rendered in cold blue light. One of them, smaller than the others, marked in the sharper white of Earth's own fleet designation. "Talk to me," she said, without turning, as Anand and I arrived. "The consortium's security escort has been reinforced. a young officer reported from his station, voice tight. 2 additional Vantic warships arrived in the last hour, bringing their total presence to 5. Our reclamation fleet is holding position at the border, awaiting further instruction. Are they moving to engage? Marchetti asked. Negative, ma'am. They're holding to. It's a standoff. I stared at the display, at those small blue clusters separated by a gap that represented, I understood distantly, an actual distance in actual space, where actual people were sitting in actual ships, waiting to see who would blink first. Ambassador Okafor, Marchetti said, still watching the screen. I need you to reach the Vantic delegation immediately. Direct channel. No intermediaries. I want them to understand exactly what happens if those 5 ships do not withdraw within the hour. Okafor, who I had not noticed enter behind us, moved to a communications station without hesitation. I watched his hands, steady in a way that surprised me given everything. Given the shuttle, given the shaking urgency of Castaris's hands in that transit corridor only hours earlier. This is Ambassador Okafor of Earth, requesting immediate contact with the Vantic delegation regarding the situation in Sector 7. The response, when it came, took nearly a full minute, long enough that I found myself counting my own heartbeat instead of anything external, a habit I had thought I was finally growing out of. The face that appeared on the main channel was not the elder from the council chamber. It was younger, sharper featured, a military officer rather than a diplomat, and his voice, when he spoke, carried none of the ceremonial calm I associated with Vantic communication. Ambassador, your fleet has positioned itself at the border of sovereign Vantic mining territory. With respect, Commander, Okafor said. That territory was ceded to Earth 11 years ago, under terms your government agreed to. We are not encroaching. We are reclaiming. That territory has been under continuous Vantic operation for over a decade. My government does not recognize a unilateral reversal of established practice, regardless of the letter of an old agreement. Then I would ask your government to reconsider quickly, Okafor said, because the alternative to withdrawal is not one either of our species wants to discover the details of tonight. The Vantic commander's expression flickered, something that might have been anger, or might have been fear, difficult to read across species I had spent 14 months learning, and still did not fully understand. Is that a threat, Ambassador? It is an observation, Okafor said. 11 of our vessels currently hold that border. Your 5 will not change the outcome of an engagement, Commander. I do not say that to provoke you. I say it because I would rather you understand the mathematics clearly than discover them through loss of life. Withdraw, and this becomes a diplomatic matter, resolved through negotiation. Do not withdraw, and it becomes something else, something neither of us will be able to undo afterward. The silence that followed stretched long enough that I found myself holding my breath without meaning to, watching the tactical display, watching those small blue clusters hold their positions with a stillness that felt, somehow, louder than movement would have. I do not have authority to order a withdrawal, the commander finally said. That decision belongs to the council and to my government directly. Then I would suggest, Okafor said, that you contact them immediately, Commander, because our window for a peaceful resolution is closing, and I do not believe either of us wants to be the one explaining to our respective governments why it closed. The channel cut. Marchetti exhaled slowly, the first visible sign of tension I had seen from her since the basement briefing room that morning. How long until the hour expires? She asked. 43 minutes, the young officer reported. Those 43 minutes were the longest of my life up to that point. I stood near the tactical display, unable to look away, watching the small blue clusters that represented real ships and real crews. Some of them people I had shared meals with at diplomatic functions, people whose names I knew, whose small talk I had endured and occasionally enjoyed. All of them now reduced to points of light on a screen that might, within the hour, become something far more permanent. Anand stood beside me, arms folded, her earlier calm from the viewport deck replaced by something tighter, more focused. Have you ever seen it come to this? I asked quietly. An actual engagement? No, she said. Not once. That's rather the point of 11 years of hiding the fleet, Terra. You don't build a deterrent to use it. You build it so you never have to. And if they don't withdraw? She did not answer right away, her eyes fixed on the display. Then we find out whether a decade of preparation was worth what it cost, she said finally. At the 31-minute mark, the tactical display flickered, a new signal appearing at the edge of the Vantic cluster, small, distinct, moving. One ship withdrawing, the young officer reported, voice careful, not yet allowing himself relief. At 34 minutes, a second ship followed, then a third. By the time the clock reached 39 minutes, all 5 Vantic warships had reversed course, retreating from the border in a slow, deliberate line that felt, watching it, less like surrender, and more like a species recalculating, in real time, everything it had believed about the balance of power in this quadrant of the galaxy. The command deck did not erupt into celebration. Instead, a kind of exhausted stillness settled over it, officers exhaling in near unison, Marchetti's shoulders dropping fractionally from the rigid line they had held for the better part of an hour. "Confirm consortium withdrawal timeline," she said, voice steady again. "I want Sector 7 fully secured and reported within 6 hours." "Yes, ma'am." Okafor stepped back from the communication station, and for the first time since the shuttle that morning, I saw something in his posture that looked, unmistakably, like relief rather than restraint. "That was closer than I would have liked," he said quietly, to nobody in particular, or perhaps to me, since I happened to be standing nearest. "Did you think they would engage?" I asked. "I thought there was a real possibility," he admitted, which is, I imagine, exactly why Marchetti wanted a diplomat on that channel, rather than a fleet commander. Officers speak in terms of capability. Diplomats speak in terms of consequence. Sometimes a frightened commander needs to hear both before he finds the courage to stand down. I thought about that, about the strange overlapping currents running beneath everything that had happened in the last 20 hours, the fear and the fury, the deception and the relief. The way Okafor's calm on that channel had been built, I now understood, on top of a lifetime of learning to sound steady, while everything underneath him shifted. My terminal chimed, a message, not from the embassy system this time, but from Kestaris. I heard Sector 7 stood down. "Are you all right?" I stared at the message for a long moment before responding, aware of the command deck around me, slowly returning to a more ordinary rhythm, aware too of how strange it felt to be asked something so simple after an hour that had not felt simple at all. "I'm all right. It was close. I know. My government is in an emergency session right now trying to understand what just happened. I don't think anyone slept tonight." I didn't either. There was a pause before his next message arrived, longer than before, and when it came, it carried a different weight than his earlier messages had. "For what it's worth, Terra, I'm glad it ended the way it did. Whatever else changes between our people, I don't think either of us wanted to find out what the alternative looked like." "Neither did I typed back, and meant it more than I had meant almost anything in the last 20 hours. Marchetti's voice cut through the command deck, calling the senior staff together for a final briefing before the shift change, and I set the terminal down, following Okafor and Anand toward the gathering, my mind still circling the last 43 minutes, the way fear had translated so plainly into biology and posture, and the careful, deliberate movement of ships choosing, in the end, not to fight a battle they could not win. "This is only the beginning," Marchetti said, once the senior staff had assembled, her voice carrying the particular fatigue of someone who has been awake far too long and still has further to go. Sector 7 was the test case. Every other species holding ceded territory will be watching how this played out, and every one of them will be recalculating their own response accordingly. Some will withdraw peacefully, having seen what nearly happened tonight. Others may decide to test us regardless. "What's our posture going forward?" Anand asked. "Firm," Marchetti said. "Patient, where patience costs us nothing. Immovable, where it does. We are not seeking further conflict. We are seeking recognition of what we terminated this morning. And the sooner every species in this council understands that recognition is non-negotiable, the sooner this transition settles into something stable." She looked around the room, her gaze finally settling on me, and I felt, not for the first time that day, the particular weight of being noticed by someone whose attention rarely landed without purpose. "Attaché Whitfield," she said, "you handled tonight well. I want you assigned to the follow-up negotiation team for Sector 7's transition. Ambassador Okafor speaks highly of your composure under pressure." I glanced at Okafor, surprised, and found him watching me with the faintest trace of that same small smile from the shuttle that morning, a lifetime ago now, though it had been less than a day. "Thank you, ma'am," I managed. "I'll do my best." "See that you do," Marchetti said, already turning back to the tactical display, her attention moving on to the next crisis, the next calculation, the next piece of a galaxy reorganizing itself around a truth, 11 years in the making. Because I suspect, Atash Whitfield, that this is only the first of many nights like this one. Earth has spent a decade being underestimated. We are about to spend the next one being understood, and understanding, in my experience, comes with its own particular dangers. I did not sleep again that night. Not really, though I lay down eventually, staring at the ceiling of my small quarters aboard the Meridian, replaying those 43 minutes over and over, the small blue clusters on the tactical display, the sound of Okafor's steady voice on the communications channel, the strange, unresolved warmth of Kestoris's messages sitting open on my terminal. Somewhere beyond the ship's hull, Sector 7 settled slowly back into Earth's hands, not through violence, but through the narrow, trembling margin of a threat taken seriously enough to be avoided, and I understood, lying there in the dark, that whatever Earth had been for the last 11 years, whatever quiet, patient, humiliated thing it had allowed itself to appear, that version of us was already gone, replaced by something the rest of the galaxy was only just beginning to learn how to see clearly. 3 weeks passed before the Council reconvened for what everyone had started calling, without any official designation, the Reckoning Session. I spent those 3 weeks on the Sector 7 negotiation team, working alongside Okafor and a rotating cast of Vantic officials who had gone, in the span of a single night, from confident overseers of ceded territory to cautious negotiators trying to salvage what dignity they could from a transition none of them had anticipated. It was strange work, careful and slow, full of long silences where both sides chose their words with a precision that had not existed a month earlier. I learned, during those weeks, that fear makes better negotiators than confidence ever does. The Vantic officials I worked with listened more closely than they once had, interrupted less, conceded points they would never have conceded before, not out of weakness exactly, but out of a newly discovered respect for a species they had spent over a decade underestimating. Kestoris and I spoke most evenings, careful conversations that circled the edges of what had changed between us without ever fully resolving it. There was no clean ending to that thread, no single moment where the old ease returned. Instead, there was simply the slow, patient work of two people learning to trust each other again, inside a relationship neither of us had realized was built on such an enormous, unspoken asymmetry. Some nights the conversations felt almost like before. Other nights they did not. I stopped expecting either outcome, and simply let each evening be whatever it turned out to be. The Reckoning Session, when it finally arrived, filled the council chamber more completely than I had ever seen it. Every delegation present in full, no substitutes, no absences, the air thick with an anticipation that had nothing left of mockery in it. Okafor and I took our seats in the same spots we always had, though everything about how we occupied them had changed. I no longer counted blinking lights, I no longer needed to. The Vantic elder, his skin finally settled back into its usual measured gray-green, opened the session with none of the ceremony he usually favored. The Council has spent 3 weeks reviewing the events surrounding the termination of the Sol Compact, he said, and the subsequent reclamation of ceded territories. We have commissioned independent surveys, as Ambassador Okafor suggested, and I will confirm to this chamber what those surveys revealed, because I believe every delegation present deserves to hear it plainly, rather than through rumor and speculation. He paused, and for the first time in 14 months of watching him preside over this chamber, I saw something in his posture that looked, unmistakably, like humility. Earth's fleet capacity, he said, exceeds our previous estimates by a factor we are still working to fully calculate. Their technological development in weapons systems, propulsion, and shipbuilding has, by conservative analysis, outpaced every other species in this council over the last decade. Conducted entirely within the restrictions of an agreement, they honored to the letter, while exceeding its spirit, in every particular we failed to anticipate. A murmur ran through the chamber, quieter than the laughter that had once filled it, heavier. I will not pretend, the elder continued, that this council owes Earth an apology for the terms of a compact they voluntarily signed. But I believe this council owes Earth an acknowledgement that the manner in which we treated their delegation across 11 years, the mockery, the dismissal, the repeated denial of standing they had, by any reasonable measure, long since earned, was unbecoming of a body that claims to represent civilized cooperation among the stars. Okafor did not stand right away. He let the elder's words settle, let the chamber absorb them fully, before he finally rose, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of the fury that had colored his address 3 weeks earlier, only a steady, unhurried clarity. I appreciate the Council's acknowledgement, he said. I want to be clear that Earth does not seek retribution for 11 years of dismissal. We sought, and continue to seek, only recognition. Full voting membership, equal standing under Council law, and the right to negotiate our future relationships with every species in this chamber as equals rather than supplicants. The chair, the elder said, will call the vote on Earth's petition for full Council membership. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous. A handful of delegations abstained, still working through whatever calculations the last 3 weeks had forced upon them. But it passed, overwhelmingly. 40 species who had once laughed at a 50-year-old spacefaring history, now recognizing, formally, permanently, what Earth had always been capable of becoming. I felt something loosen in my chest that I had not realized I was carrying, a tightness built up over 14 months of counting blinking lights, of swallowing insults, of watching Okafor absorb mockery, with a composure I now understood had cost him more than I had ever guessed. After the session closed, I found myself once more in the transit corridor, waiting for the shuttle, and Kestaris found me there again, the same way he had 3 weeks earlier, though everything about how he approached felt different now, less urgent, more certain. Full membership, he said. It's strange, watching something you always assumed was inevitable actually happen. Was it inevitable? I asked. It didn't feel that way 3 weeks ago. No, he admitted. It didn't. I think that's rather the point, though. Nothing that matters ever feels inevitable while it's happening. Only afterward, looking back. We stood together for a moment in comfortable silence, the first truly comfortable silence we had shared since the morning everything changed, and I found myself thinking of the halberd's impossible silhouette against the dark, of Marchetti's basement briefing room, of Okafor's steady voice on that communications channel, while 5 Vantic warships held position at a border that might, in another version of that night, have become a battlefield instead of a negotiation. What happens now? I asked, though I was not entirely sure whether I meant it for the Council, for Earth, or for the fragile rebuilding thing between the two of us. I don't know, Kestaris said, and there was something almost peaceful in the admission, a willingness to sit inside uncertainty rather than rush past it. I suppose we find out together, if you're still willing. I'm still willing, I said. The shuttle arrived, and I boarded it alongside Okafor, who had watched the exchange from a respectful distance, with an expression I could not quite read, though I suspected, given everything, that it carried more warmth than his usual composure allowed him to show. Full membership, I said, once we were seated, the shuttle pulling away from the Council spire for what felt like the 100th time in 3 weeks, though this departure carried none of the weight the first one had. Full membership, Okafor agreed. 11 years, Terra. 11 years of being small on purpose, so that we could finally stop being small at all. Do you regret it? I asked. The years of pretending? He considered the question with the same careful attention he gave every question, turning it over before answering. No, he said finally. I regret what it cost the people who carried it, myself included. I do not regret that it worked. There is a difference, I think, between mourning a price and regretting a choice. We paid a steep price for 11 years of patience, but I do not believe there was a version of this outcome that did not require paying it. I looked out the shuttle window, watching the Council spire recede into the dark the way it had that first morning, except now, the light catching its surface seemed different somehow, less imposing, more simply what it was, a building full of people finally beginning to understand a species they had spent over a decade failing to see clearly. What do we do now that they finally see us? I asked, mostly to myself, though Okafor answered anyway. Now, he said, we get to find out who we are when we are not performing smallness for an audience that never deserved the performance in the first place. I imagine it will take some getting used to. I thought of Kestaris, standing in that transit corridor, willing to sit inside uncertainty, rather than rush past it. I thought of Marchetti's basement briefing room, of the halberd's impossible silhouette, of 43 minutes, that had nearly become something none of us could have undone. I thought, too, of the version of myself who had walked into that chamber 14 months earlier, learning to count blinking lights because it was the only way to survive being laughed at, and understood that she was gone now, too, replaced by someone who no longer needed small, steady details to hold on to, because the ground beneath her had finally, permanently, stopped shifting. The shuttle carried us back toward the meridian, and beyond it, toward a decade of patient deception finally, fully, spent, its purpose complete, its cost paid. Its outcome, no longer a secret held in asteroid fields and quiet manifests, but a truth. Every species in that chamber would now have to learn to live alongside. Earth had ended every treaty overnight. What came next, I understood. Watching the stars shift slowly past the shuttle window would take considerably longer to write, but for the first time in 14 months, I found I was not afraid to discover what it held.